there, welcome. I'm Tracy Moore, and I'm excited to talk to you today about a topic that's really close to my heart. Professionally, I'm a licensed mental health counselor. My passion is education about essential oil and how those specific substances can help us release past traumas, release the past so that it's not got this stranglehold on us anymore. I've seen this in my own life and in my own family, and in a little bit, I'm going to tell you some of those stories. But first, I want to talk about you. You may or may not be a victim of trauma or abuse, but odds are you know somebody that has been. 1 in 5 Americans have been sexually assaulted as a child. 1 in 4 are beaten by a parent to the point where marks are left on them. 1 in 3 couples engage in physical violence to solve their problems. 1/4 of us grew up with alcoholic relatives, and 1 in 8 of us have witnessed our mother being beaten or hit. Trauma leaves a trace. Whether it's big or little, it leaves a trace on future generations, on the current generation, on the body, on the brain, and on the cells, which transfer not just to future generations because we are the parents of those future generations, but because cellularly that is true as well. Quick look at the concept of epigenetics tells us that for a woman who's pregnant, she's carrying the generation ahead of her, but also the generation ahead of that. Not only her baby, but the reproductive cells of that baby's children. Think about it. If a woman is carrying a female baby, guess what's inside that female baby? All the eggs she will ever have in her life. All the genetic information that she will potentially pass down to her children. That's amazing to think about and incredibly scary. It's interesting to me as a Christian looking at the scriptures that say the sins of the father we pass down to the 3rd and 4th generation, and now looking at science and seeing, whoa, that's what that means. Not just because of the nurturing that you'll get from that family, but also because of the nature that you get from that family, the genetic makeup that you get from them. It's passed down. What do you do about it? Is there anything you can do about it? Yes, there is, and that is where we're headed. But first, let's dive a little bit more into trauma, some definitions, and what that looks like and manifests in the body and the mind. So what is trauma? Well, it's a deeply disturbing or distressing experience. It can come in the form of a physical experience, an emotional experience, some negative or adverse thing that happens in your life. There are things that can happen in your childhood, things that can happen in your adulthood. Trauma can be subtle or it can be really big and obvious. The obvious traumas are easier for people to understand. If you went to war and you came back and had flashbacks or nightmares, people would understand that. That's not an uncommon thing to be in a war zone and have your life endangered and to come back with trauma. But what about the less obvious thing? A car accident, someone you love dying. Of course, those things are horrible, but do we really think about how those traumas, as normal as they may seem, actually leave a physical impact on the brain? Because guess what? They do. Whether the trauma is big or little, it changes the way your brain works. And that's why it's so important to look at this in a way that is broad. So if you're listening to this and you're thinking, I didn't go to war, I didn't get abused as a kid, I mean, I got spanked or my dad yelled at me or whatever, guess what? There's still little things, little traumas that make up who you are, for better or worse. Some people are able to move through and work through those events with relatively little complication. It still changes the way their brain looks, but because of their past good experience, their past positive attachments with family members and other people in their community, they're able to work through those things because the brain is neuroplastic. That means that it can adapt and change. You don't have to stay stuck where you're at. There is always hope. And that's at the heart of what we're going to talk about today. No matter how big the trauma that you've dealt with or someone you love has dealt with, there is absolutely always hope. First of all, as a believer, nothing is impossible with God. And second of all, as a therapist, there is absolutely always hope. So from a science perspective for a minute, let's talk about how the brain is really different when it's exposed to traumatic experiences. Let's look at a quote from one of my favorite books on this topic, The body keeps score. We now know that trauma compromises the brain area that communicates the physical embodied feeling of being alive. These changes explain why traumatized individuals become hypervigilant to threat at the expense of spontaneously engaging in their day-to-day lives. They also help us understand why traumatized people so often keep repeating the same problems and have such trouble learning from the experience. We now know that their behaviors are not the result of moral failings or signs of lack of willpower or bad character. They are caused by actual changes in the brain. Isn't that amazing? I love science! So this fantastic book, which you should totally get, by the way, I'll have a link below. It helps us understand exactly what the scientific community is studying and what the therapeutic community is saying, hey, let's do this with our treatment approaches. So the author of the book talks about 3 ways, really, that we approach the treatment of trauma. From the top down, so a cognitive approach, where you're attempting to change the way you think about it and then change your brain's reactions and your emotional responses. Don't get me wrong, I love cognitive behavioral therapy. It's primarily what I used when I was in private practice, but there's always something missing. You know that part about how people keep repeating what's going on? That's the part that was happening. As much as we would try to go the cognitive route from the top down, it never manifested in lasting behavior change for many of my clients. However, for some it did, and this was the difference between people who were exposed to trauma in their lives and people who were not exposed to trauma in their lives. It was that often repeating cycle that was so frustrating for my clients and for me as a therapist to say, hey, what am I missing here? So the other treatment modality for trauma is just treating symptoms. So if someone has post-traumatic stress disorder, for example, they'll treat it with a drug. This is the part where I remind you I'm not a doctor and I'm not recommending any specific course of treatment for you. So what the medications do is that alters the pathways in the brain so that the trauma is less traumatic, so that they can function in everyday life. And that's really important. The other thing that medications do is dampen the alarm systems. So for example, someone with PTSD that is always alarmed, always triggered, what medication can do is help dampen that alarm system and bring it back down. The trick there is it doesn't actually solve the problem, it just treats the symptom. That's not necessarily a bad thing. However, when we look at the research and see that there are other modalities that can help longer term than medication, it's worth taking a look at if it's something that you're dealing with personally. There's studies being done on different modalities like incorporating yoga and breathing, EMDR, theater, and neurofeedback. There's no single approach that fits anybody. Everyone is so very different, and the traumas that they experienced are all so very different. The other approach, which is what the author of the Body Keeps Score book recommends, is the bottom-up approach. So attending with body sensations and focusing on breathing and really reconnecting with that lost sense of self that was diminished in the experience of the trauma. So there's treatment modalities like EFT, emotion focused therapy, that involve tapping and focusing on different body sensations to help target the brain in specific ways and remap the pathways that need it. And there's another approach I'm going to tell you about in a little bit that incorporates several of these methods, and you'll have to stay tuned for what I think is the best approach when dealing with trauma. And that's what we're going to talk about next. So we know that the brain is different for people that have experienced trauma. There are literal changes in the brain. We can see that on scans. Also, you can see that in real life. You don't need a scan to see that a person is having a physical reaction to something that was traumatic, maybe something that triggered them and they're freaking out. There are those physical reactions as well. And it's in part because of how the brain is so different for people who have experienced trauma. Our initial human tendency is when we're upset to cling to someone. Think of a baby crying. They want their mom. It's just built in us in our design to seek that closeness. But what we find with trauma victims is that the opposite is true. In studies that have been done about eye-to-eye, face-to-face closeness, some very interesting things have been discovered. In the control group of people that they studied, the prefrontal cortex was activated in response to face-to-face gaze, eye-to-eye. That prefrontal cortex is the part of the brain that's responsible for figuring out what's the intention of this person that is coming at me. Is it a friend or a foe? It's analyzing. But for trauma survivors, when in the same scenario faced with eye-to-eye gaze, the response was very different. No part of the prefrontal cortex lit up on the images. They had no curiosity in analyzing what this person was trying to do. So what lit up? The para-aqueductal gray. What in the world is that? That would be the primitive part of our emotional brain that stimulates startle, hypervigilance, cowering, and self-protection. There was no curiosity in the brain about this simulation that they were eye-to-eye gaze with. It was a simple, immediate startle response reacted in the brain for victims of trauma. In response to direct eye contact, they went into survival mode. For traumatized people, the whole world is a trigger. There's only disaster, there's only pain and suffering. Nothing can ever be good and nothing positive can ever come. Everything results in negativity or numbness or depersonalization so that they don't actually feel. See, it's extremes. That's what trauma is. It's an extreme anyway. And the brain reacts in extremes. There's the extreme of a trigger to a trauma where someone is explosive, out of control, freaking out, and sometimes harming other people in response to that trigger because they're trying to self-protect. On the other extreme, you have people that just go numb. They go blank. They freeze in response to traumatic events or traumatic triggers. Their body and their brain lock up and they can't seem to do anything. They almost go catatonic. Either extreme is scary, but either extreme has hope. And that's what I want to talk to you about. The hope that there is, that things could be different, that the whole world doesn't have to be a trigger, that you can actually rewrite and retrain the pathways in your brain to health. You don't have to be enslaved by your memories any longer. There is a way to release the past and make it no longer impactful of your present. So I mentioned earlier that our family was changed in response to trauma, and that's true in multiple dimensions. Without getting into too many gory details, my own history involves some measures of the traumas I mentioned earlier. But that is the before, and I am glad to tell you that there is an after to that story. It's not an easy road, and it's one that is still being walked down daily, but there is an after. There is hope. It doesn't have to be the same. Also, as an adoptive parent, I know the struggle that can come when a child comes from a hard place. There is an after to that too. I struggled as an adoptive mom in understanding exactly what was going on. And I think that's true for a lot of moms that are parenting kids from hard places. And even when you know it, sometimes your own responses are from your traumas from the past and not from the situation that's currently happening. The amygdala, the library of our brain, takes over and we react out of books from our emotional library rather than the situation that's currently happening. I wanted so bad to be a good mom. I wanted so badly for it to be normal. And I did all the things that I could think to do that were in my control. I was still reacting out of books from my emotional library, the books that said, you suck and you can't do it and you aren't really meant to be his mom. Horrible, heartbreaking books. But I have to tell you how I burned them, how they're no longer applicable to me. Those books don't exist in my library anymore. And the tears you see welling up in my face is not because those memories are painful to me, but because I'm so glad to be on the other side of them. Friends, there is hope. And I found it in the most unlikely of places. I never expected that there would be such amazing changes in our family from little drops of plant material. How could something so seemingly insignificant and so hokey, hippie, weird actually make an enormous difference for our family? How is that even a thing? Didn't all the gurus know what they were talking about? Didn't all the therapists that I trusted and knew, and all the adoption specialists that I talked to, didn't they know what they were talking about when they said, just try this and try that and do this over here, and well, and I did it all and it didn't work. It didn't work. I wanted it to so bad, but it didn't. It didn't make a lasting impact. It worked for that moment, but it didn't last. So here's why I do this and why I tell you this. Because when you find something this amazing, you can't be quiet about it. When you find something this life-changing, there's no lengths you won't go to scream it to whoever will listen. This isn't about selling a product. This isn't about making money. This isn't about a rank or a bonus or anything else. This is about me as a helper. I always have been. When I was in high school, my best friend said I should be a therapist, and I laughed at her. I knew I was good at it. I knew I could talk to people. No, more than that, I knew I could listen to people. And I knew that I gave pretty good advice, but I didn't want to do it. I knew therapists didn't make any money, and I didn't want to talk to crazy people all day. But I did know that God made me to be a helper. It's my unique design. You have one too, although it may not be to be a helper, but you were made for more. And my guess is that you're letting your past hold you back from that. Keep you in slavery, keep you in bondage. You're letting your books tell you you suck and you can't do it. Nothing will ever be different. You're letting your mind go there instead of looking to the present, instead of looking to the future of what is possible. And I'm here to tell you there is a lot that is possible. So what did I do? That's what you want to know, right? I'm not here to puff you up and tell you life is great on the other side and then not give you any solutions. So let's get down to it. I'm telling you what I did and what I know changed everything for me and my family. It was essential oils, and it sounds so hokey, and how weird is that? How weird is it for me to tell you that a little bottle made all the difference for our family? That's weird. And that was my exact response when I used it and it worked. That's weird. Probably a coincidence. And then I did it again. I did it again, and well, some pretty great stuff happened. For me, the blend is Trauma Life. I remember the first time I smelled Trauma Life. It was the best smell I had ever smelled. Meanwhile, I let my mom smell it. She says it smells like throw up. Everybody's different. But it's not about the smells. It's about the cells. Because what happens when you smell, and if you're watching and you have oils with you, you can do this with any oil. It doesn't have to be Trauma Life. Although I wouldn't recommend like Digest or anything. What happens when you do that? The little teeny tiny essential oil molecules, 40 million trillion of them in one drop, go in and impact your cells. Not just a little, a lot. 40 million trillion. So your entire system is impacted just by that inhalation because it's going through your nasal passages, through your olfactory system, crossing over the blood-brain barrier and impacting your limbic system, the seat of your emotions, your amygdala, your emotional library. And these molecules literally change the cells. This isn't voodoo magic, it's science. Man, it's there. The truth, the information is there. You just have to look for it. I remember the first time I used Trauma Life, I used it for my son. His backstory is complex, but I will tell you this. He had a significant amount of trauma even before he was born, and at birth had some medical complications that kept him in the hospital for 34 days. During that time, there wasn't an attachment formed with a primary caregiver. Not for lack of wanting to do so, of course, but because of medical necessity that he be monitored very closely. And even after his release from the hospital, there were lasting impacts that followed him, in part because of the trauma and in part because of the traumatic experience of not having a primary attachment figure. So as soon as I got Trauma Life and put it on him, I can't even explain it. We were having a pretty rough parenting day anyway. So as soon as I took Trauma Life and used it, I put some topically on him. I can't even explain what happened. It was immediate changes, not just in him, but in me. I remember we went outside and he wanted to go on the swing set. I pushed him for a little while. Then he wanted me to swing with him. So I sat on the swing set and he wanted to climb up on my lap and swing, which we had never done before. He had never asked to do it before. But he wanted to be close with me, like face to face with me. And previously, when we had gotten close face to face, there was, remember when I talked about the startle response, the hypervigilance that comes for victims of trauma? And so it was very typical for us to not have good eye contact, first of all. And if we did have eye contact, he would actually lash out at me. But this time on the swing was different. Great. It's a memory that I go back to whenever I wonder, is this worth it? What am I doing? I remember this. The smell on him when it mixed with his body's chemistry did something in my brain and helped my pathways, my memories reconnect and form a different point of view. The trauma that I had experienced from being injured and being lashed out on was fading away. And even now as I talk about it, it seems far away. I used to fear him. It sounds terrible, but it's really true. It's really true. I used to fear him and have my own exaggerated startle response whenever we were eye to eye because I expected him to hurt me. I can't remember the last time he did anymore. So in response to eye gaze, not just was he being triggered, but I was being triggered. But this moment on the swing was beautiful because the scent of the oil mixed with the pheromones from his body was life-changing for me. It was this moment of clarity and calm and preciousness, where he looked me in the eyes and would talk to me and give me hugs and kisses. And this is not what this child did before. It was an attachment moment that was precious. It was an emotional connection because of this blend. And it wasn't just a single connection. Because what happened is I continued to use it whenever I felt the need to, or whenever it just connected with my emotions and my mind that it was something that would benefit me. I've learned as I've used oils on a continual basis to recognize my body's cues and say, okay, something's not quite balanced. And so let's reach for an oil that's going to help me balance out my emotions. And so I continued to use it throughout the week and I think into the next week, but something remarkable happened. He had continued eye contact without injuring me. Not every time, and there were instances of triggering and re-trauma. However, each time it became easier because it was already, the pathways were already there. It became easier for us both to stop and redirect. Whereas previously it was epic, hours long battles of pain, physical and emotional. And there's another set of oils that helped tremendously with our son, and that's the Reconnect Collection. Specifically two oils, Reconnect and In Touch. The differences I've seen in our son are dramatic. He is a new child. His emotions are not as on his sleeve, as surface level, where everything would result in just this complete and utter meltdown, breakdown, tragedy before. We're now at the point where that's not the case. Is he still an almost 3-year-old? Yeah. Does he still yell when he shouldn't yell and do inappropriate things? Yeah, because he's 3. But the fear of that is no longer impacting our day to day. The big stuff, the big, very clear, very obvious emotional trauma triggers, the things that made time stop for our family. Those aren't happening. And if they are, they're lasting moments instead of hours. My kid is different because his cells are different. The emotional memories are different. They've been rewritten with books that say, I believe in you. You are loved. You are not broken. You can do it. It's okay to be sad. I care about you. You don't have to hurt me to get my attention. I see you. You are not alone. Those are the books that he has now in his emotional library. And the books in my emotional library are different. You are a good mom. God chose you for a reason. You are here for such a time as this. There is light at the end of the tunnel. There is hope. Things are different now. It is a new day. It is so possible for you to release the past. And there are ways that essential oils can help you to do that. And it's because of the way the molecules work in the brain and the way God designed our body to be responsive to these plant materials. Specifically, I am only talking about the oils that Young Living provides because they have the biggest depth and breadth of action, and I believe are the only choice for you and your family. There are techniques like the Aroma Freedom technique that are phenomenal for helping you release the past and move forward into a bright future. If you'd like more information on the Aroma Freedom technique, you can click the links below. Releasing this kind of deep-rooted stuff is not easy, but it is simple and it's worth it. It takes work, it takes intentionality, but it's so very possible to completely overhaul your emotions and your mind. It's possible to rewrite those books in your library. Your story can have a different ending. Your story can be different. Your story can be better. You can rewrite the books in your library. I want to help you start your story. There's nothing that gives me more joy than helping somebody to get started using essential oils for themselves and their family. They've made all the difference in the world. So when I tell you we dove into Young Living, both feet for head first, I think once I realized they worked, I cannonballed into that stuff. Like, we changed everything pretty quickly. I'm a go big or go home kind of person. So we cannonballed in, we got tons of oils, and we just started using them. We just started using them because they don't work if you don't use them. I want to help you start your story. Maybe for you that looks like a big cannonball jump and be like, yes, let's do it. I'm ready. And if that's you, let's do it, man. I'm ready. You're ready. Everybody's ready. So you're going to want to check the links here and find out how to get connected with me and get yourself started. Because I am here to tell you, life is beautiful on the other side of using essential oils from Young Living. My story is a happy one now. Let's start changing yours. I'm Tracy Moore. Thanks for watching.